What's up? Nothing makes me feel more alive than making some lazy tier list content for some quick and easy controversy and views. So, with the release of PR6, it is once again time for me to ride the hype and make some updates to my tier lists. If you didn't see the last set of tier lists, the criteria is simple. It is arbitrary, up to my discretion, and not everything has to have a reason. For example, I am starting with the heavy and large cruiser class. Is there any particular reason? Nope, not at all. Will aesthetics once again play a part in a tier list masquerading as gameplay oriented? Stay tuned to find out. If you are a new player looking for information about the game to aid you in your progression, look anywhere else. I will be using the portrait of my favorite skin for each ship to represent them for the sake of my own sanity. The minimum knowledge that you will need to understand this video is to be able to see a ship's portrait like so, and be able to identify the ship immediately. If you have correctly identified the name of this ship, then you have earned the right to continue watching. I will not be answering any questions like who is the third ship in the C tier. However, to get the most out of these videos, you will benefit from having PhDs in philosophy and statistics, the ability to detect irony, as well as being able to read Chinese. Another disclaimer. I will not be including every single ship of each hull class in my tier list. Not only am I lazy, but I seriously doubt that anyone cares about the difference between Hero and Bash. If, for some reason, that is what you're looking for, you should perform an investigation into the mystery yourself and make a video about it. I think it will go viral. I'm also not gonna pretend that this is the only Azur tier list on the internet, so I'm sure you'll be able to find one that features your favorite ship if I left them out, at the cost of them being wrong, obviously, because this is the only objectively correct tier list. If this video gets 1 view, I will make the next part. Honestly, I'm lazy, so I really hope it doesn't. Now, with that out of the way, let's finally begin the 2023 edition of my Heavy Cruiser tier list. I'll begin by explaining what each tier means. This time around I've reduced the number of tiers, but the order in each tier does matter. S tier contains only ships that are the absolute best at what they do and have no competition in having a slot in the fleet. After that, A tier contains very strong ships, but not quite on the same level as S tier. B tier contains strong ships that don't stand out too much these days, and most of them are interchangeable. These 3 tiers could be called Triple S, Double S, and S, but I just made them S, A, and B for convenience sake. B tier ships are still pretty good. C tier contains ships that I just find to be cute or hot in the whole class. And finally, F tier contains ships that will be content if I put them in F tier. I will begin from top to bottom. First up in the S tier is Drake. Just kidding, it's actually A gear. She is the tankiest large cruiser in the game, and doesn't fall much behind the others in terms of damage either, while providing valuable slow and armor break support. She has no weaknesses and is worth using even if you use someone else as a tank. She is pretty much a perfect ship, evidenced by the fact that she is pretty much still as good now as she was when she came out 2 years ago. Next up is Drake. Psych, it's Hindenburg. From my in-depth analysis, i.e. taking one look at her skills and loadouts, I predict that her personal damage will be at least Plymouth level and most likely above. And even Plymouth runs into trouble with shields that Hindenburg will not. She is almost certainly the highest damage Vanguard ship in the game, and given that she was designed by Yunsang, she will almost certainly have some insane Life 2D skins down the line. Now that we're done with Hindenburg, surely the next ship will be Drake. Oh, it's still not Drake. That's weird. Anchorage is the only tank in the game that is competitive with A gear in high pressure situations. Unlike A gear, she deals less damage, but her value comes from being able to time her own invincibility and smokescreen to protect the other ships in the Vanguard when a big attack is coming. Back in the olden days, when you think of heavy cruiser, you think of the most reliable tanks that you can bring, and Anchorage has been carrying the entire class on her back for about 2 years now, while large cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers have been running circles around the heavy cruiser class in pretty much all aspects of the game. And that rounds out the S tier. Next, let's see what we've got in the A tier. First up, Kronstadt. She deals the most damage out of all the large cruisers and a similar amount to Drake, but if you want, she can function as a proper tank, and is also a mainstay in Operation Siren for the cross-fleet -2 spread reduction for battleships, making her the second most useful large cruiser in my opinion. Next is Brest, who I think has an amazing design, but they kind of dropped the ball on the swimsuit skin. Her niche is that she heals as a large cruiser, but she doesn't replace a healer in practice, and if you are running a healer, then her heals on top of being as tanky as she is just overkill. You're better off using a healer plus Kron or maybe ships from another class really, but she is still an extremely tanky, I believe the second tankiest after A gear, large cruiser, and she also deals a respectable amount of damage. Next up is finally another heavy cruiser, and an HMS one at that. Yep, it's Cheshire. Her bulk is around the same level as Drake, slightly below, and she trades damage that is barely worth it over using Aurora for the best anti-air in the game, which is much more useful to me. She is also top 5 as far as design goes in the heavy cruiser class. A well-deserved spot. Next up is Baltimore, best friend of Enterprise and Yorktown 2. Unlike air raid assist, her buff gives aviation, which scales much better for the USS carriers as they're saturated with flat damage buffs. She gets another upgrade with a new Hindenburg gun, and the Baltimore class also has the best designs in the entire heavy cruiser class. Next, we're back to large cruisers with the last one, Azuma. She doesn't deal as much damage as Kronstadt and is the least tanky of the 4 Rainbow large cruisers, but nevertheless, she is still a Rainbow large cruiser and sometimes has a useful niche of triggering IJN ship requirements. Now that we're done with large cruisers, next will surely be Drake. Turns out it's San Francisco. And I might as well reveal now that Drake comes right after her. Now you might be thinking, San Francisco over Drake in 2023? You must be out of your mind. Feel free to close the video if you want because there are probably 5 Drake stands in total in the world, so I'm not bothered. In the rear position, which is where you would typically use both, San Francisco deals more damage against light armor than Drake because her Destroyer Aux gun makes a huge difference, especially now that Tash guns are relegated to being Aux guns if you have enough of the Rainbow Destroyer guns. Against medium, Drake deals more personal damage, but if you account for the damage buff that San Francisco provides to your other 2 ships, then the difference is not great, and that was before Hindenburg's gun. Notice how much better Hindenburg gun is than Drake gun against medium, and the huge improvement in firing angle. I haven't upgraded any Drake guns to +13, but I'm most likely going to be upgrading a couple of Hindenburg guns to +13. So imagine being a heavy cruiser who's not able to use it. Loser! Now, if you wanted to make the case that Drake is better than San Francisco, largely because she is quite a bit more bulky in the rear position, I wouldn't look at you like you're crazy. But your taste is definitely subpar. Anyways, enough of that, it's time to move on. Next up is Northampton 2. I haven't really used her much, but she's actually probably underrated. Not for the slow, because everyone just uses Implacable these days, but more so for her damage. She's slightly stronger than Drake for the same reasons San Francisco is, having a Destroyer Aux gun, the ability to use Hindenburg gun against medium, and a 10% damage buff for all cruisers. If she gets a better skin, I'll take a closer look at her compared to San Francisco and Drake, but for now I'll just leave her right here next to the 2 of them. And with that, we have wrapped up A tier. In the B tier, we begin with Chikuma, who is quite tanky and offers a small amount of carrier support and damage. In most cases, she is outclassed by other ships, but technically offers slightly more support than the other ships in B tier, putting her in the front. Next, I am just going to reveal a whole bunch of ships at once. All of them are more or less stat sticks, some with slightly higher damage and others with slightly higher EHP. You won't see a huge difference using any of them in your fleet, so I ordered them by aesthetics alone. I will briefly go over each one. First up is Bremerton, one of the best designs in the game. Her damage is slightly on the higher side and EHP on the lower. Next up are Zara and Pola. They are slightly improved Portlands that will work even better in Italian-themed fleets. Gorizia would also be here, even stronger than Zara and Pola, but she doesn't look as good and I don't want to overcrowd the tier too much. Next up is Talon. She is definitely on the tankier side, but her damage is on the lower side. Then we have Blucher, who is probably the highest damage in the group alongside Bremerton, but not the tankiest. Next is New Orleans, who is kind of like a gold Portland. And finally, we have Idolrune, who is extremely accessible in the core data shop. She functions decently well as a tank, but her utility is a bit useless in autoplay. On manual though, she can still be very potent. Next up are Haguro and Portland, who are consistent, low investment tanks for new players. Haguro has the rare ability to tank and noticeably improve the survivability of your Vanguard. Something that is limited to pretty much only Anchorage aside from Haguro, unless you want to count hit count shields, which I don't find to be that noticeable. Unfortunately, she is an event limited ship, so if you don't have her, you don't have her. And of course, I could never leave out good old reliable Portland, who carried me through my progression of the game, and remains a great option for new players who need to retrofit her for beginner missions anyway. The last ship I will include in this tier is Kursk. Her damage is quite high with all her little gimmicks, but I found that her submarine torpedoes have trouble hitting moving targets, and she's just way too squishy relative to the damage she brings to be worth it. I wanted to make her work, but she really just isn't that great. And with that, we have wrapped up the B tier. Some honorable mentions that would just go somewhere in the middle of the B tier stat stick group are St. Louis, Minneapolis, Mogami, some of the collab CAs, London, and Shropshire. Here are the ships that are deserving of C tier. Ibuki might be worthy of B tier, but I haven't used her in battle in so long. They need to give her the torpedo spread reduction already, and then I'll bring her back out for a quick spin. Finally, we arrive at the F tier, where I just put a couple of ships just for the drama and controversy. And people, in quotes, are definitely going to be pissed off, especially if they see this out of context, which is pretty much how anything gets spread around the internet these days. Anyway, that is the end of the heavy cruiser tier list. If you want to see the EHP ranking of the ships in the stat stick tier, or any ships in general, I will leave a link to Meebot's EHP spreadsheet in the description, but it is nigh unreadable for a normal human. I hope that I have evoked some emotion or thought within you, and see you in the next tier list if this video gets 1 view.